As we recognize the heroism and sacrifice of the men and women who served our country, we're also shining a light on the mental health injuries that many sustain. The Department of Veterans Affairs estimates between 11 and 20% of Afghanistan and Iraq veterans suffer post-traumatic stress. People with PTS can experience a number of distressing and persistent symptoms. This can include recurring nightmares, sleep problems, panic attacks, and anxiety. For more on this, I want to bring in Ken Falke. Ken is the chairman of the Boulder Crest Foundation, which supports veterans, first responders, and their families in the aftermath of trauma. He's also the best-selling author of the book Struggle Well, Thriving in the Aftermath of Trauma. Ken, thank you for being here. You spent 21 years in the Navy's explosive ordnance disposal community, and you retired as a Master Chief Petty Officer. Tell us more about how your own experiences in the military led you to form the Boulder Crest Foundation.
Yeah, thanks, Lana. So my wife and I, early in the war, we started a small charity that today is known as the EOD Warrior Foundation. EOD is the job I did, explosive ordnance disposal or bomb disposal. And in about 2011 to 12, we had a really long rash of amputees. And we started bringing the families of these amputees. We live about an hour outside of D.C., started bringing them out to our home. And we had a 200-acre estate there. And we literally had these families in our home every weekend. It started off as barbecues, weekend stays, those types of things. And we ended up donating 37 acres of our farm. And we built the nation's first privately funded retreat center for combat veterans and their families, Boulder Crest, Virginia. And 3 years into that, our largest donor provided us with a grant, a $10 million grant, to open up a second facility in Arizona.
It's incredible what you've done, and your organization, along with your book, Struggle Well, helps combat veterans battling post-traumatic stress and other mental trauma achieve post-traumatic growth. Tell us more about the science behind this concept.
Yeah, well, I spent about a year of my life traveling around the country, talking to some of the top psychiatrists and psychologists, social workers in the country. And I kept hearing over and over again what we were doing for veterans doesn't work. And finally, I was having dinner with a couple in San Francisco, and the wife of this couple, both psychiatrists. She said to me the same thing. And I said, well, if it doesn't work, why do we do it? And immediately she responded, because it's the only thing the insurance companies will reimburse us for. And at that point in time, I just knew we could do better. On this journey, I met a psychologist at the University of North Carolina by the name of Rich Tedeschi, who had coined a term, post-traumatic growth, which I was really intrigued by. Most of Tedeschi's research was centered around families who had lost children to cancer, to find out that the families had gone on to do some very remarkable things in the aftermath of their child's death. But that story, although it resonated with me, a guy who lost his mom at 7 years old, my mom was 29 when she died of cancer, that story resonated inside of my family. But most of the people I talked to are military people. And I said, have you ever done any research on the military? And he said, well, actually, yes, we studied prisoners of war from Vietnam. And then he had my attention, and I said, well, what did you find out? And he said, well, about 30% of prisoners of war from Vietnam came home with PTSD, which, by the way, I believe is very similar to this modern-day generation, percentage-wise. And he asked me how many prisoners of war I thought would have come home with PTSD, and I immediately said 100%. And he asked me why I said that, and I said, well, I've been in combat. I've been through SEER school, which is the training the Navy has for how to escape and behave if you are a prisoner. And I couldn't think of anything worse on the battlefield than being a prisoner of war, especially like the Vietnam vets who were in these camps for up to 8.5 years. Anyway, it wasn't 100%, it was 4%. And to this day, prisoners of war, especially the pilots who have been studied since 1974, are healthier than their peers, men that weren't shot down. So, and the psychiatric community, again, failed because they had said that to the families of these men to be prepared to institutionalize them. And the complete opposite occurred. And this is where post-traumatic growth in that story really resonated with me. So I asked Tedeschi, I said, well, I get it that you've studied the outcomes, but do you think we can teach people how to achieve post-traumatic growth in their lives? And he said, nobody's ever asked me that, but I'm here to help. And that's how we started at Boulder Crest.
I just want to ask you a follow-up question about that. I would assume that that very low reporting of post-traumatic stress was in part because of the stigma associated with it. Are you saying, though, that there was something else that was going on?
Well, in the prisoners of war, do you mean specifically?
Right.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't. I think what happened was, today they refer to this as the Stockdale Paradox, and Jim Stockdale, who retired as an admiral in the Navy, was literally a stoic. I mean, he was very well read, and he trained these men in these prison camps how to create hope in their lives and how to get this stigma and this shame and guilt that they were carrying off of their shoulders, and that resulted in, like I said, only 4% of the men coming home from those camps with PTSD. And by the way, the ones that were diagnosed with PTSD were the ones that were in captivity for the least amount of time. And psychologists believe that's because they didn't have the time to connect like the men that were in there for much longer. So, it's a really interesting story. And I think it's a lesson for all of us who have served in combat to understand that PTSD is real and that we can, in fact, thrive in the aftermath of trauma if we do the right things. And that's really what we suggest with post-traumatic growth.
Certainly, we hope that for anybody who's battling with post-traumatic stress. Ken Falke, thank you.
Thanks, Lana.
If you or someone you know is a veteran struggling with post-traumatic stress and would also like emotional support, you can call the Veterans Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255 and press 1.